Hi beautiful souls, it's Tan back here on this channel with another video for you, and today's kind of an exciting day because I'm going to be talking about out of bounds planets in astrology and your hidden craziness. I currently did an exchange reading with a human design reader, and it was a really amazing experience to be able to provide each other with insights into each other's kind of natal charts and human design body graph, and it's kind of one of the best experiences this year. This woman is an absolutely amazing woman. You can find her on YouTube. Her channel name is When the Stars Align. She's also on Instagram as When the Stars Align. I may even provided a link to her channel and her Instagram in the description box below if you are interested in human design. She actually specializes in Mayan astrology as well, so if you're interested in that. But basically, while I was doing this reading for her, we came across the topic of out of bounds planets, because she has planets out of bounds, and I also have planets out of bounds, and I feel that people who have planets out of bounds tend to be drawn to each other for many reasons, which I'll go over in this video that I'm so excited to be sharing with you guys. Yeah, we like to find tribes and people that we can really connect with when we have planets out of bounds. What is an out of bounds planet? In order to find out if you have an out of bounds planet, you have to check the declinations in astrology, and declinations are very important in a birth chart. If you've got a reading from me, you'll know that I sometimes look at your declinations to let you know if you have planets out of bounds or not. And I think to really get a grasp of this, I'm going to have to go a little bit into what a declination is, which I will do for the next 5 minutes. And if you're not interested in that, you can skip that and then go right into my explanation of out of bounds planets. When a planet is above 23 degrees, 26 minutes, and 22 seconds in the declinations chart, this is different from the degrees that you see on your planets in your basic natal chart. If you want to know if you have planets that are out of bounds, you can go to astro.com, generate your natal chart. There's going to be an option to open an additional PDF file. You can click on that and look under declinations to see if you have any of your inner planets, meaning the moon, the Mercury, Venus, Mars, maybe even Jupiter, that are above 23 degrees, 26 minutes, and 22 seconds or not. If you have, it's considered out of bounds planets. If it's near that degrees, it's going to be near out of bounds. What exactly is a declinations, and why is this even important? When we're looking at astrology, we are kind of projecting from the Earth, the orbits of the planets and the sun, specifically the sun. When we do this kind of a projection in order to map out the stars, we have what is called a celestial sphere. The celestial sphere is based on the projection of two different points. The first point is from what is called the ecliptic plane. So it's a projection of the orbit of the sun through the sky. This is the path that the sun follows. There's also another point in which we can project the mapping of the stars with, because the Earth is tilted. We also project into the celestial sphere the point of the equator. This is called the celestial equator. It's a projection of the orbit of the Earth's equator. When we are mapping out our natal chart, we're actually mapping where the planets are when it's traveling along the ecliptic plane. That's how we get the degrees of the planets and where they're located in your natal chart. But there's also another mapping, which is to map the planets and its respect to the celestial equator. When we have a declination, we're measuring the distance of the planets from the celestial equator, how far that is. Okay, so this is kind of like, you have to imagine this a little bit of like a 3D kind of a mapping. The further the distance of the planet is from the celestial equator, the higher the declination is going to be. And because the ecliptic plane is measured with respect to the orbit of the sun through the sky, the distance of the ecliptic plane and the celestial equator is never more than 23 degrees, 26 minutes, and 22 seconds. It's just not possible because that's the path of the sun, and that's how we're mapping this out. So that the maximum distance is always going to be that particular degrees. So you can imagine it like this, like when you have your natal chart, when you have the normal degrees, this is a brief explanation, you're measuring the distance of the planets going left to right, kind of going in this more 2D plane. But when you're measuring the declination, you're measuring how up and down the planet is. That's a brief explanation, but of course this is 3D, so there's other dimensions to it. If any of the planets, when they're being mapped out, is outside of this particular maximum length between the celestial equator and the ecliptic plane, it means that it's outside of the orbit of the sun, so it's going to be an out of bounds planet. But of course, you know, this particular the greatest distance between the ecliptic plane and the celestial equator, it does change over time astronomically because of the way that the Earth is rotating. But in astrology, it's kind of fixed as this particular degrees. And the point in which the celestial equator meets the ecliptic plane, that particular point is the spring equinox and the autumn equinox, which is equivalent to the zodiac degrees, the constellation of Aries and Libra. The furthest point of the ecliptic plane of the celestial equator, that is considered to be the summer solstice and the winter solstice, which is in a correspondence with the constellation placement of Cancer and Capricorn. So generally, if planets are going out of bounds, they're going to be in the sign of Cancer, Capricorn, Gemini, or Sagittarius. Because it's kind of along that maximum distance that we talked about there. Basically a summary of planets that are going out of bounds, and it's pretty rare to have planets that go out of bounds. So we can consider about 40 to 50% of the people will have at least one planet going out of bounds. Sometimes, of course, you will see planets that are in Scorpio or Aquarius that also goes out of bounds. It depends on that particular year, time that you were born. All right. So with respect to the 3D astronomy that we just talked about previously of how this works, we can consider planets that are out of bounds to be out of the mainstream of society. And David Cochrane, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, describes the out of bounds planets as like, if you can imagine there's like a glass wall in which inbound planets will be in. The out of bounds planet is kind of like sitting outside the glass wall. It's an invisible glass wall, transparent glass wall. So the out of bounds planets are sitting outside. So these planets are kind of like they're camping on the outside of the mainstream of society. They're camping outside the box. They're in communes, or sometimes they're just alone outside there. If you have an out of bounds planet, there's a part of you for that particular planet, the way that you take action on that planet, that is outside of the normal patterns of life. Now, this doesn't have to be physically, it doesn't have to be something that you do, but it definitely is something that is happening more psychologically. But there's also something called a near out of bounds planets. If you have something in your declinations that is kind of, let's say it's above 23 degrees, but it's not yet at 23 degrees 22 minutes, it's near out of bounds. And this is also important because it's like a spectrum of out of boundsness, right? And the larger you are out of bounds, meaning if in the declinations you have inner planets that are like 29 degrees or 27 degrees, they're like way out there and they're kind of really removed from the society. But if they're sitting around 23, 24 degrees, they're still a part of that planet and part of you that can still relate to the mainstream of the normal way of life. Normal, kind of the mainstream majority way of life. Yeah, there's a little bit of this quality of being a little bit of an oddball. If you have planets out of bounds, it's got this Uranian quality to it. In esoteric astrology, Aquarius is associated with being on the fringe of society, but being able to bring those more innovative, progressive, strange ideas back into the society in order to progress the society. So the out-of-bounds planets will have a Uranian quality to them in that sense, but it's not the same as Uranus, and I'll explain a little bit why. Out-of-bounds planets will feel uncomfortable to be doing things that everybody else is doing or that's a bit mainstream. It needs to have its freedom. It needs to be able to experiment and explore what authenticity means to that planet. The out of bounds planet kind of observes the typical functioning of the inbound planets and sees how it can be improved, and kind of brings in innovations, systems or new ways of thinking to improve the qualities of the more typical inbound planets. Meaning that you can have ways of improving the society that are a bit more innovative, basically. If the planet is near out of bounds, or it's just a little bit out of bounds, it has more success at bringing in new ideas and innovations and relating to the mainstream, to the majority of people, in a way that's going to be understandable and relatable, so people are more willing to accept your innovative ideas to progress society. But the very way out of bounds planets operates a little differently, in a sense that it's harder to bring in new and innovative ideas into the society. But if you have this, what may work for you is that you have to be the one to bring the people from the mainstream into your zone, your world, in order to make the progress happen. So what is the difference then between Uranus and out of bounds planets? Uranus, in astrology, as with all outer planets, have a more collective psychological imprinting in our birth charts. So if, for example, you have a moon out of bounds versus a moon conjunct Uranus, they may act in a similar fashion, but the moon conjunct Uranus person is operating in such a way because of a certain amount of unpredictability in the childhoods, or could be some shocking or more disturbing situations in the childhood and in the way that they were nourished that causes them to behave in a more maybe rebellious or in a more progressive manner because of that imprinting in the childhood. But the out of bounds planet doesn't have such an imprinting. It's simply that the person just feels that they are different. It's just the way that the spectrum of the society's main way of doing things, the planet is just not in that spectrum. There's not so much of that imprinting of the past as Uranus could have on someone's psychology. Okay, so I hope that kind of made sense so far, guys. Yeah, I think I covered everything. So now I want to go through each of the out of bounds planets and kind of give you a quick interpretation of what it would mean if you have those planets out of bounds, especially the inner planets. Well, only the inner planets, really. Approximately 15% of the people in the world have an out of bounds moon. So out of bounds moon people, if you have this, you feel odd. You have strange, odd feelings that can come out of nowhere. You may feel left out sometimes, or you may feel a little bit like a loner. Because the feelings are so odd, in order for you to be in synchronicity with these odd or strange feelings, it's gonna also have to be a little bit odd. So if you have an out of bounds moon, your lifestyle may be very different. And this also comes in terms of career, because a career is something that we have to do on a daily basis. The moon is very personal. We use the moon all the time. The career life then may have some very drastic changes if you have this placement, because if you're not doing something that gives you freedom, and there's the majority of jobs in the career world doesn't really allow for that freedom. So you may break away at a certain point of your life to have a career that is just of your own making, so that you can act on your feelings when they arise unexpectedly, strangely, in a comfortable way. Because what makes you feel good is not going to be mainstream. It may not even be accepted sometimes, but it is authentic to who you are. So you're gonna have to honor the weird and strange things that make you feel good. And Stephen Forrest talks about the out of bounds moon as being more of an emancipated moon. It needs that freedom. And sometimes an out of bounds moon, people, if you have this, you may have a living situation, or you may want a home or domestic life that is a little bit has to be the way that you want to make it, basically. So if you want to have like a massive big house with crystals under the ground to generate some energies when you walk into your house, that's what you got to do. If you want to just be nomadic and travel the world and live wherever you want to live, that's what you got to do. If you want to, have a really vintage or antique type of a home with all its like secondhand furniture, that's what you got to do. And I do know some out of bounds moon people who are very unconventional in the way that they want to have or build their home. Your home has to feel like you. Everything in it has to be super authentic to you to make you feel comfortable enough. And relationships can be hard for out of bounds moon people because of the range of emotional spectrum, because the planet is out of bounds. So the range of your emotional spectrum can span infinitely. And I do find that it kind of matters if the moon is like in personal signs like Cancer or Gemini versus if the moon is more like Sagittarius, Capricorn, or even Aquarius. Because if the moon is more like in Cancer or Gemini, the person may be very emotional about their own personal life. But this is going to vary, depending on where the moon is placed in your chart, what aspects it's making. But I found that if the moon is out of bounds and it's in like Aquarius or Sagittarius or Capricorn, the person tends to be very emotional about other people's feelings. So this is a very empathetic type of a person. If you're crying, they're crying. If you're sad, they're sad. They can feel it 10 times more than you're feeling it even. But, I've seen that if the moon is more like Gemini or it's in Cancer, the person is feeling about themselves and their own lives 10 times more than anybody else would feel about a particular similar situation. Sometimes, because the emotional spectrum is boundless, on the more negative vibration of it, it can lead to some self-destructive behaviors. Sometimes criminals have an out of bounds moons because they feel like they can't be bothered to care about how people are going to feel, so they can kind of do things that, to act on their emotions that can kind of be associated with criminal behavior. And these range of emotions and feelings, it will depend also on which house the moon is falling into. If it's like in the second house, then you can be very insecure. But of course, you can also be very secure. If it's like in the fourth house, you can feel so much for your intimate relationships, but not so much for other people who are kind of not so intimate and close. If it's like in the seventh house, then you're feeling a lot of other people's feelings very much. It depends as well. And yes, like relationships can be hard for out of bounds moon people, because if your partner, if their moon is not vibing with your moon in whichever way that is, if they're not a very emotionally orientated person, they may not get where you're coming from with your feelings, these range of spectrums of emotions. And the out of bounds moon person it's hard to sometimes control the emotions and feelings that comes up. So finding an outlet or a way of handling this is going to be really important. This placement has been termed as the emotional outlaw. If you have this, you can get tired from the societal expectations, and you may sometimes withdraw from that and kind of like be a little bit of like a hermit, just need to be alone because my feelings are not coinciding with all the expectations of the society, and I need a break from all of that. Albert Einstein has this placement, as well as Sigmund Freud, by the way. The last thing I want to mention about out of bounds moon is that if you think about how the moon rules Cancer in astrology, and the opposite point of Cancer is Capricorn, and Capricorn is about authorities, the bosses, the government. So if this is opposing each other, naturally in the zodiac wheel, out of bounds moon people don't do well with authority. They prefer to be the one who is the authority. Like, they get really uncomfortable and even emotional and can have extreme behaviors when they're being told what to do, when there's an authority that's kind of they're confronting with. So yeah, that's it for the out of bounds moon. Next is going to be the out of bounds Mercury. So about 13% of the population have an out of bounds Mercury. So with the out of bounds Mercury, the way that you process and analyze information and communicate information is odd. The process of the processing of information itself is a little bit strange. It's not the way that a lot of people's rhythms and patterns of processing information is. Sometimes you can have thoughts about being a loner or being left out. You may have strange thoughts from time to time. This can happen with out of bounds Mercury's strange thoughts that can kind of come out of the blue, and you have to be very rational, okay, about whether you're going to act on these thoughts or not, because there are some criminals as well with out of bounds Mercury, because they have strange thoughts that they act on. This out of bounds Mercury may cause you to have sudden epiphanies, sudden insights that come out of nowhere. You may think outside the box, definitely, but there can also be anxious speech patterns involved as well, because the Mercury is operating very out of bounds and energetically. And so the reason why communication can be difficult with out of bounds Mercury is because of that boundless perception. When you have boundless perception, and when you're constantly receiving way more information than in the present moment, the words can get stuck. Because let's say you're having a conversation with someone or with a group of friends. Let's say there's a question that somebody asks and is posed and poses in that discussion. Immediately, there are limitless answers that you will have in your head, limitless things that you could possibly say. There can be things that you may want to say that pleases the person. There may be things that you want to say that you feel is very truthful and can be controversial. There could be things that you feel that you could say that poses more questions, and there can be things that you feel that you could say that is funny and it's just a joke and it's lighthearted, and there's just like these thoughts flying into your head all at once. They may have even thoughts of things that are very preachy, or maybe it's a biased opinion that they just feel like, yeah, this is something good to be discussed, but wait, I shouldn't say it because then it's too biased and it can appear biased. Maybe I should just make a joke, but then maybe the joke's not appropriate for this situation. Maybe I should just say something to please everybody else and kind of dumb down my opinion a little bit. So you see how the mind is just boundless in that sense? It's out of bounds. What the out of bounds Mercury person then tends to do is that they can hold back and kind of disappear in that conversation. They blank out, they think about other things to cope with it. If it's a chat or a text message, they may not reply you because they can't reply in that moment because there's too many possibilities of things to say and they don't know which one is the best one to choose at that moment. So there's a couple of ways of coping with this out of bounds Mercury. Is first of all to find a community of people of like mind so that you can speak your truth without having to go through all these filters into choosing how to say things, so the truth can just come out unfiltered in the way that you want it to come out. But out of bounds Mercury is a genius Mercury, and the key to genius that studies have shown are the common traits between people who are considered to be genius is that they have the ability to concentrate and focus for hours and hours and hours. So if you have an out of bounds Mercury, find something that you can direct your attention to, that you really love, that you're really interested in, then you can focus on it for hours and hours and hours, because if you could do that, you are going to be able to break through certain limitations of a specific field of study that a lot of people have not managed to break through, and it's going to be super innovative and super genius. The last thing that I want to mention about out of bounds Mercury people is I've noticed that sometimes they speak very vaguely, and I can see why this happens is because you may, sometimes when you're trying to talk about something and it is a topic or a perspective that it's not concrete. The truth behind it, or at least your truth behind it, is not really concrete enough, and it can only be felt. It can only be felt by the intuition, which also, you know, has to do a little bit with Mercury. Mercury can also be that the opposite point is the 9th house, right? Of 3rd house, which was Mercury, it's the 9th house, house of intuition. So with this axis, sometimes certain things can only be felt with intuition, and the Mercury out of bounds person may also understand this, and you may, because you want to tell the truth, and sometimes the truth can't be told using specific words to describe. Sometimes there's just no word to describe the truth. There's only metaphors or analogies, and therefore sometimes when you're listening to an out of bounds Mercury person, you have to also use your intuition and read between the lines. So that's what I've noticed with this placement. Out of bounds Venus. So about 20% of the population have an out of bounds Venus. It's pretty rare. So with out of bounds Venus, your preferences and your likes are gonna be odd. You may like to actually be a loner, or you may actually like people who are a bit of a loners. You may like people who don't really fit in. You may like to not fit in. So you may like pleasure experiences or expressions of beauty that is unique, eccentric, unconventional. So I've noticed that if, for example, the person has a Venus in Capricorn and it's out of bounds, you know, first is like Venus in Gemini, Venus in Sagittarius out of bounds. The Venus in Capricorn out of bound tends to be people, generally it's what I've noticed, is that they don't really dress, because Venus can rule our style, right? They don't necessarily dress eccentric or strange. They can dress pretty kind of like just like minimalist, you know, but they would more of like prefer life experiences that are boundless, like traveling or being in nature, that really gives them kind of unconventional, pleasurable feelings. They prefer like music or a career that they really love, that brings them unconventional pleasures. That's what I've noticed generally. But other Venus out of bounds people may actually dress in kind of unconventional ways, and this can go in two ways, meaning that I've seen that some of them wear like very eccentric makeup, like fluorescent makeup, or eccentric hair. But there's other types who are more of like very natural, like they don't want to wear makeup at all, they want to dress naturally, they don't put any products or chemicals in their body or their hair. But whichever way that the Venus out of bounds go, it's just not like what the mainstream does, because in the mainstream, you know, people will just have a certain amount of makeup on, they'll do their hair in a specific way, and that's kind of in bounds. But the Venus out of bounds will take it out of that. They can draw to them wild love life as well, wild relationships, wild people, because they like wild things. So they're going to draw these types of more wild people into their lives, and they like these types of relationships. They have more of like this experiential love nature, because Venus is a very experiential planet. Venus wants to touch and feel and feed the senses. So with their lover and their partner, they want to be experiential. Sometimes they can have several marriages, not always, but some Venus out of bounds people prefer to be single and prefer to not be in relationships at all. If you have a Venus out of bounds and it's making aspects to the moon or Neptune, I would say you've got great potential to be an artist. But specifically if it's the opposition, in conjunction, even the square or the quintile and biquintile, these produce more energy and creativity in art. And these people's artwork can be kind of like in your face, very straightforward, very dramatic, or very expressive. And the style, you'll know their style when you see it. It'll be different and you'll remember their style. But if Venus is more like a softer aspect to Moon or Neptune, their work may not necessarily be so much in your face, you know. If this is whether this is a man or a woman, you know, they have a way of bringing beauty to you that can be very addictive, because it's like their way of expressing beauty is not seen before. It can be subtle, or it can be very, like I said, in your face, but it's kind of different, and so you feel like you want to go back and see more of their beauty. Whether it's their art or themselves, it's very magnetic. whether it's photography, dance, or the way they dress, it's very magnetic. Also, because Venus is a feminine planet, Venus rules your femininity. There's also, with out of bounds Venus people, this kind of like need to support women's rights. And sometimes this is like I've seen that they would support kind of unconventional ways of expressing women's rights. For example, like not shaving, or like no bra lifestyle, because they believe that gender rights have to break all types of conditioning. We have to break through that and really just be equal in terms of both genders. And sometimes in their relationships, like I said, they can draw wild types to them, meaning that sometimes you may be in relationships with people who's like a very big age gap from you. Sometimes they're very different in culture or religion. They don't speak your language maybe, or maybe they just live very far away, that there's this distance in the gap between you and another person. But they're gonna go for this because they view that love can transcend all of these more time and space dimension understanding or acceptance of what a relationship should be. And they may even like to do kind of unconventional activities with their partner. Like their idea of romance can be very unconventional. They may like to have a skydiving wedding, and that's romantic for them, or like diving, underwater scuba diving wedding is like romantic for them, whereas for most of the people, the kind of like the mainstream romance, kind of like candlelit dinners, you get the idea, with wine, And I feel like out of bounds Venus people can do very well in any types of relationships with people who have like a Venus-Uranus aspect, or like Venus in the 12th house, or Venus in the 11th house with Uranus. That type of an energy can kind of jive pretty well with people who have Venus out of bounds. Judy Garland has Venus out of bounds, and you never forget her from The Wizard of Oz, because I feel like that movie just has this, it's beautiful, but there's something way ahead of its time, right? Going from black and white to being a color. Mars out of bounds. About 17% of the population have Mars out of bounds. And with Mars out of bounds, the energy is odd and strange. And your energy puts you in a position where you are a loner a little bit, because there's something within your body, in your DNA, in your genetic makeup. The energy doesn't quite flow quite like the typical majority of the people's energy would flow, meaning that you have to, when you're trying to do something, if you're trying to cooperate with other people, working in a team, or following a certain deadline, that can be a little bit hard for out of bounds Mars people, because they're like I said, their energy patterns are different than the mainstream. You can try to force your energy. You can drink a lot of coffee, to try to get that energy up when it doesn't have to be up, and you can try to die down the energy, maybe through meditation, when the energy shouldn't be up. But then that's out of your kind of natural rhythmic patterns, and that can cause repressions. And with out of bounds Mars, you don't want to repress your energy, because it's going to lead to a bit of a volcanic explosion. There can be extremes of feelings of anger, or needing to express anger erratically. So you want to honor your natural body rhythms and your natural energy levels. When that comes up, you need to be able to use the energy. When that dies down, you need to be able to rest. So if you know any of them in your life, don't tell them what to do. Don't tell them what to do. Don't tell them what to do. They don't like it. I mean, if they have an out of bounds Mars in like Cancer, they may hesitate, and they may be like, yeah, sure, I'll go along. And they'll hesitate, be like, oh no, and then yeah, and then no. And eventually they're gonna burst, and they're gonna rebel against you. Let them do their thing. Let them do it when they want to do it, in their own pace, in their own time. With this out of bounds Mars, you inspire yourself, you motivate yourself. The motivation is coming from within you, and you if you could find a way to let your energy fight for a cause, I use this word very lightly, to advocate for a particular cause in a strategic way to make radical changes in the society, that's very powerful. That's where your energy can go. Look at which house your Mars is sitting in. If it's the second house, you can be very motivated to make money, but it has to be done in your own pace, under your own terms and conditions, when you feel you want to do it. Like, if you have this placement, you probably really need to be your own boss, and following timelines and deadlines can be very difficult. If it's like in the 7th house, you're gonna need a partner who's gonna be very compatible with you energetically and with regards to the time and pace in your life. Because if that person is too fast for you or too slow for you, there's gonna be a lot of power struggles with this one. So you really need to be able to find that. These people, they can take on the world, really. There's like, I think Martin Luther King Jr. has out of bounds Mars. But I would recommend, if you have like Mars and Capricorn out of bounds, go ahead, you can take on the world. You're probably gonna do it in the right timing. But if you have like an out of bounds Mars in Cancer, which Mars is weak in Cancer, the best course of action is going to be still. In stillness, in listening to your intuition, you're going to know exactly the right timing and when to do certain things, rather than just doing and doing and doing, because it's not the way that Cancer energy works. So you can accomplish simply in stillness. And that's actually very interesting, to be able to do nothing, really, and accomplish. And do nothing, we mean like you really don't have to force yourself or your energy to do something, just really go at your own pace. These people have a way of empowering themselves that can be very unique. Whatever strategy they employ, they can be innovators in ways of self-empowerment and in kind of revolutionaries. Not reactionary, by the way, but a correct revolutionary. They can be pioneers in that. They can be fueled by that in their life. I really think of Kelly Clarkson's song, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger and a little taller." I feel like this has this vibe of this out of bounds Mars to it, where you can be very strong. These people, like if you have this, you can be knocked down with circumstances in your life and you can get back up more powerful than you were before, in a way that's like, it's like a miracle to a lot of people that you can do this. You are very courageous. Like, your courage is out of bounds. So this can be good, but of course this can be dangerous depending on how you want to use it. But if you're using this correctly, then your courage is out of bounds, meaning that you can have an attitude of, I don't care, I'm going for what I believe in this life. I have the right strategy to go for what I believe in this life, and I'm going to make it happen. And I know that it's going to be a little bit risky here and there, but I'm brave and I'm courageous. I'm going to make my life the way that I want to make it. They can be people who just march to the beat of their own drums and find success. Very ambitious people, and have a drive to make those ambitions real. If this particular Mars out of bounds is also in an aspect to Uranus, watch out, people, because if you have that, you're like a master manifester, and not in a human design sense of manifester, but meaning you can manifest from your mind. Get into some manifestation techniques, do some meditation to manifest, because the things that you say, they happen. So if you say positive things, that happens, but if you say negative things, that will happen in your life. The power is really in your own hands if you have an out of bounds Mars. So, last but not least, out of bounds Jupiter. About 1% of the population have an out of bounds Jupiter. If you have this, please comment below. I would like to know if we have somebody on the channel who has this. But it's very rare, and there's not a lot of research being done on it, so I can't really give you too much information, but just from what I can interpret, because I had a client, not sure how many, but I've had at least one client who had an out of bounds Jupiter, and she was a teacher, and I feel like she has a lot of wisdom inside of her. So I feel like with this placement, the perspectives, the beliefs on certain things can be strange or odd or out of bounds, meaning that, if you are stuck and you don't know how to get out of a particular situation and you go to an out of bounds Jupiter person, I feel, this is my intuitive feeling, that these people can give you a perspective into something that is coming from, you don't know where it's coming from, but it's coming from somewhere, and it changes your life because of the way that they can flip your perception in that sense. So I feel like there's that ability to have that type of a wisdom there. So public recognition can be something that is very powerful for you. You can be very famous, very popular, be very well recognized in the public. So that's going to be my interpretation and this little video on out of bounds planets. Do comment below if you have any planets out of bounds, what degrees in the declinations are those out of bounds planet in, and what has been your experience. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you haven't. We do currently have an online astrology hub where you can connect with me and other astrology enthusiasts out there. So the link to that will be in the description box below. Come and join us. And I do birth chart readings, synastry and relationship readings. All the information is on my website. You can check that out. And I'll see you very soon, beautiful souls. Bye!